Right now, the day's biggest news stories from a Vegas perspective. This is the Vegas Take with Sharp and Shapiro.
All right, welcome back. It is the Vegas Take, Sharp and Shapiro. Glad you could join us on a Wednesday, hour number 3. Boy, there is a lot going on in this country right now. No question about that. From a legal standpoint, boy, a lot of questions to be asked. And what better person to ask some of these legal questions than a man that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. He's an American syndicated columnist, publications such as the Washington Times and Reason. I've been watching him for years on Fox News. He does such a great job, and he also served as a New Jersey Superior Court judge from 1987 to 1995. Also a visiting professor at the Brooklyn Law School, a man with tremendous knowledge, and we all have tremendous respect for him. Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for that generous introduction.
Judge, you deserve it. So I want to ask you. I want to ask you a lot of in-depth questions, legal questions. But before I do, I want to ask you this. You know, there was a moment. You know, there have been moments on Fox News where I think you're always intellectually honest, which I appreciate. But there have been moments on Fox News where you've actually had some hosts that have gone after you and called you names, and you always seem to rise above that, and you just do your job well. How have you been able to handle that over the years? I remember you had a moment with Shepard Smith where he defended you, against Tucker Carlson. How have you been able to handle those types of situations?
I just realized that it's only television. It's not brain surgery.
Right.
And, it comes and goes. We had a boss, a great man. He obviously had some flaws which have been publicized. He's no longer with us. Roger Ailes, who basically used to say, "Don't piss in the tent," but that obviously is not the case anymore. In the case of Tucker Carlson, it had a happy ending to the extent that there's an ending. I mean, he and I are now friends, and I'm on his show once a week. So you just never know in television when whatever skills you have might be needed by whoever is pounding you at the moment. I try to explain the law as I understand it in a manner that the public can comprehend, and I try to keep politics out of it. I get a little irritated when people spin the law to serve a political purpose because they're really not being intellectually honest. And exactly. I know that sometimes by being intellectually honest, you've got to take your hits. That's why we have contracts. They pay you even when you take hits.
Yeah, you're right about that. And listen, I don't want to just single out Fox News. There are other networks and the other members of the media that do the exact same thing. So that's interesting to me. So do you feel like you have a little bit more leeway now? I hate to use that word, that Roger Ailes is no longer with us. Do you feel like it's a little bit easier for not just you but other people to go on Fox News?
Actually, I meant the opposite.
Oh, okay.
In the Ailes days, you could not attack a colleague on air. You'd be taken off air or disciplined or forced to apologize or go in the corner with a fool's cap on. But there'd be some public consequence. Let's put it that way.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to get into some legal questions with you. This is your expertise. What was your first reaction when you saw the President of the United States tweet out about Antifa, wanting to call them a domestic terrorist organization? And what knowledge can you give us? Does the President even have the authority to do that?
Well, I was disappointed when he did that because he has a history of making statements about the law or the Constitution, which he then has to either take back or pretend he didn't say or change the subject about. There's absolutely no basis in American law for anyone, the president or a Congress or a governor or a state legislature, declaring Americans to be a terrorist organization. In fact, the statute that provides for these declarations is entitled Foreign Terrorist Act. Foreign Terrorist Act. So if the State Department declared an organization that was funding Hezbollah, just giving you an example, as a foreign terrorist organization, that would make it unlawful for Americans to provide material aid to that organization. That's a federal statute that allows that declaration. It's a weird statute because it basically allows the federal government to decide what is criminal and what is not. Because what is a terror organization to the Trump State Department might not be a terror organization to a fill-in-the-blank whoever preceded him or succeeds him, State Department. But in terms of declaring Americans to be a terrorist organization, there's no basis for it, and I think he was informed of that by someone in the White House counsel's office within a few hours of his having said it.
So whoever was behind the funding of a lot of these riots and looting and vandalism and the things that are taking place, that have taken place the last couple of days, how would you define them as a collective then, by United States law?
Well, they are engaging in acts of terror under federal law if each individual now, not as a group. We don't have group prosecutions and we don't have group guilt in the United States, thanks to James Madison. But if an individual engages in two or more criminal acts, criminal meaning felony, meaning the penalty is a year or greater in prison, intended to alter the public policy of the government, that is defined as an act of terror. Now, that enables a judge at the time of conviction to enhance the penalty. So if you throw a rock through a liquor store window and go through the broken window and steal a bottle of bourbon and you're caught, you're going to be charged with destruction of property and breaking and entering, stealing the bottle of bourbon. But if you do that for the purpose, and the government has to prove this purpose, of changing the domestic or foreign policy of the government, then whatever punishment you could get for throwing the brick through the window, the feds could add a few years to it because it became an act of terror.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Judge Andrew Napolitano. Of course, we watch him all the time on Fox News. Judge, I want to get your thoughts. A decision now imminent, they're saying, on additional charges in Floyd's death. We don't know if that is this one officer who has already been charged or possibly the three other officers. I want to get your legal perspective on this based on everything you know.
I've been arguing all week that there really is no such thing as third-degree murder because if you read, I think Minnesota may be the only state that uses that terminology. If you read the definition of it, it is basically the reckless use of excessive force. Well, reckless means manslaughter. It doesn't mean murder because murder requires intent, and there was clearly an intent to murder here with the knee on this poor fellow's neck for 8.5 minutes. So I have been arguing not only that third-degree murder is a misnomer, but that this officer should be charged with first-degree murder for two reasons. One is first-degree murder requires intent and planning. Well, you can actually plan a murder while you are committing it when it takes you a good deal of time to commit it. So right. He had his knee on this guy's neck for 8 minutes and 43 seconds, during the course of which George Floyd begged for mercy and said he can't breathe. The knee was still there. One of the other officers said, "Don't you think we should turn him over now?" And the officer
said no.
At those points in the 8.5 minutes, he is planning to continue this until the end happens, and the end does happen. So that's a classic first-degree murder. The other reason for charging with first-degree murder is there probably is not going to be a trial in this case. How could the defendant and the state possibly get a fair trial in this environment? So charging with first-degree murder will result in a plea of guilty to second-degree murder, which is 45 years in jail, which for him is virtually a life sentence. He's in his early 40s.
Judge, right. I have to give you this information because this is breaking news. We just heard from the Attorney General that they are moving the third-degree.
No, this came from Amy Klobuchar.
Oh, it came
she
from
was
Amy
speaking
Klobuchar. Okay.
about the Attorney General.
So we've just learned that it appears as though this officer will be charged with second-degree murder, not first-degree murder. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a mistake, but there certainly is more of a basis for second-degree murder than there is for this misnomer third-degree murder, manslaughter. Second-degree murder is intentional killing without planning, without premeditation. And as I said, the penalty is 45 years. The penalty for first-degree murder in Minnesota is life without parole. So the ultimate outcome is nearly the same, but the prosecutor has lost a negotiating chip, which is to say to the defense counsel, your guy's facing life in prison. Plead to second-degree murder, and we'll get him 30 years instead of 45. They don't have that option now.
Judge, I want your reaction to this as well. Amy Klobuchar also saying that the 3 other officers involved will also be charged. I think we all agree that this was just a matter of time, but they're not saying what they're going to be charged with. I mean, I know it's, we don't know yet, but in your estimation, what do you think they're going to charge these 3 other officers with?
They should be charged with aiding and abetting a murder. One of them initially held George Floyd down, but all 3 of them, they're police officers. They have a duty to stop crime, even if the crime's being committed by one of their buddies. None of them did anything. Now, aiding and abetting is a very serious charge. In some states, I don't know how Minnesota treats this, but in some states, the aider and abetter, if present at the scene of the crime, is exposed to the same time in jail as the committer of the crime. So for aiding and abetting a second-degree murder, you're going to be exposed to 45 years in jail, assuming you had the ability to stop it, which, of course, they did. You can't look the other way when your buddy is killing somebody and you're police officers.
Judge, you've presided over a lot of cases in your career, and I know this is, I'm putting you in a spot where you're going to, you're going to do a little bit of guesswork here, but with your expertise, how many years do you think this officer is going to get? And these 3 other officers, what would be your best estimation? How many years do you think, assuming they're convicted, do you think these officers are going to spend behind bars with your experience?
Well, I think there will be a plea, what the public calls a plea bargain, meaning instead of a trial, he'll plead guilty to second-degree murder, but the state will offer him, 25 or 30 years instead of 45 years. There has to be some inducement to plead guilty because a trial would be a circus, and as I said, it'd be very, very difficult for the judge to find 12 people who are jurors who are truly neutral on this. No matter where you go, they can't go outside the state of Minnesota, so no matter where you go in that state or how long you wait before the trial, it'd be very, very difficult to have a trial that's fair both to the state and to the defendant. But I would think anywhere between 30 and 45 years would work. Though, if it were up to me, as I said, I would have charged them with first-degree murder and enhanced the jail time exposure. The behavior here is among the most reprehensible and public crimes I've ever seen in my 45 years as a lawyer.
So the knee to neck restraint that was applied by Officer Chauvin in that situation is more or less outlawed and banned by almost every single police department in the country because it can cause suffocation. That is not the case with the Minneapolis Police Department. And a couple of Carmel, Indiana has sued them. The city of Minnesota just sued the state of Minnesota just sued the Minneapolis Police Department. Do you see more lawsuits coming towards the Minneapolis Police Department from other places that have had damage they could argue that was basically caused by the action of one of their officers?
I was really unaware of how unique the Minneapolis Police Department is compared to others. I mean, New York, which has 38,000 cops, it's the largest police department in the country, maybe the largest in the world, I don't know. The cops would be immediately arrested for doing something like that because it's absolutely prohibited, and they're told very early on in their training about this. The fact that it is not prohibited tells you a lot about the culture in Minneapolis, with which I, as a guy from the East Coast, was unaware. But the fact that it's not prohibited as a tool is not licensed to use it to kill. Absolutely not licensed to use it to kill. I don't even believe that it is a defense, meaning defense counsel can't even tell the jury that the police department permits this as a means to subdue. Because of the 8 minutes and 43 seconds, he was not subduing; he was torturing and killing.
Right,
Judge. Let's switch topics a little bit. Again, a couple more quick questions for you, Judge. If you're just joining us, it's Judge Andrew Napolitano from Fox News. Let's talk. Explain to me the legalities. If you own a business, you're in your business. My understanding is if you feel like your life is in danger, then you can shoot somebody to defend yourself. But my understanding of the law, and I know that state by state it differs, but my understanding is if someone is just stealing something in your store, you can't just shoot somebody. That's my understanding of the law. Can you explain to us, when do you have the right to shoot somebody?
Your understanding of the law is correct. You have the right to use deadly force in your home. You wake up in the middle of the night, there's somebody standing at the foot of your bed. You have the right to use deadly force against that person. You have the right to use deadly force when you reasonably believe the person is using deadly force against you, no matter where it is. In your liquor store, when somebody's stealing a bottle of bourbon, in your bookstore, where somebody's stealing a book by Dostoevsky, or on a public street. You can always use deadly force when it is being used against you or you reasonably believe it's being used against you. But absent that use or that reasonable belief in the use, or absent the hypothetical I've given you about waking up in the middle of the night and somebody's in your bedroom,
Right.
you cannot
exactly.
use deadly force. So can you shoot somebody that's stealing a bottle of booze or a television? Answer, no. You can use force to stop them, but not deadly force.
So you can't shoot to kill them, but can you shoot them at all?
No. You could shoot a gun in order to terrify them into leaving your store and dropping the goods they're trying to kill, or they're trying to steal. But you cannot use deadly force on them when they are not using deadly force on you. That was not always the law, but it is the law today. There was a time when you could use deadly force when they unlawfully entered your premises and unlawfully were removing things from your premises. That's not the law any longer.
Do you think that should be revisited under circumstances like a mass riot? Because there's a lot of businesses across the country where people where they were inside their businesses, they had their windows broken, they had their things destroyed, they had their place burnt down under circumstances like that. And obviously these are kind of unprecedented times as far as a national riot or looting type of situation. Do you think that particular law should be revisited under those circumstances?
I do. I mean, I am a strong defender, as you guys know, of the Second Amendment. And for people who say, why do you need magazines that hold 30 rounds, and why do you need 5,000 rounds in your safe? Turn on your television, and you'll see why you need magazines that hold 30 rounds and 5,000 rounds in your safe. The police are incapable of protecting our private property. They're barely capable of protecting us.
Fair enough. I want to ask you a little bit, Judge, about what took place a few days ago and your thoughts on this, not just from a legality standpoint, just your opinions on it. I mean, the president decided to march a few blocks from the White House, and he decided to show a Bible. And this is, I guess it's an opinion, but it certainly appeared to be a photo op to me. The legalities of this, there is a peaceful protest going on throughout the day there, right? I'm not talking about any riots or anybody breaking the law. And Bill Barr's out there a few hours earlier, and to his discretion, I guess he's the one who advised them, the officers and the people involved there in the National Guard, to shoot rubber bullets and push those people back. Your thoughts on that? Is it legal? Was it legal? And just the logistics of it all. What are your thoughts on what took place a few days ago?
The short answer is it absolutely was not legal. The longer answer is the Attorney General, Bill Barr, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, should be utterly ashamed of themselves for allowing themselves and their offices to be used as stunts by the president. This was a crime committed when people in that park peacefully and lawfully assembling to complain about the policies of the government, absolutely protected behavior under the First Amendment, were assaulted by rubber bullets and by tear gas. Whoever ordered that committed a crime by ordering the assault. And the military police should not have complied with that order because they are taught on day one it is unlawful to obey an unlawful order. As far as what the president did, it was reprehensible and condemnable, and he deserves the grief that he's getting.
Could not agree with you more, Judge. I have to ask you about the Insurrection Act. Given to presidents, correct me if I'm wrong, the power to deploy the military for about 200 years. What are your thoughts on this act and the law, and can and will the president do it?
Well, the president will probably do whatever he believes will help him politically or be supported by his base. So it's hard for me to predict what he will do. But the Insurrection Act has been modified by the Posse Comitatus Act, and both of them have been modified by judicial opinions. So I'll give you the bottom line. The bottom line here is the president can only use active duty military. We're not talking about a National Guard who live and work among us and put uniforms on weekends. We're talking about the people that were in Lafayette Park the other day. The president can only use active duty military to enforce a federal law when the states are unwilling to enforce it, like desegregating the University of Mississippi during the Kennedy administration, or desegregating an Arkansas high school during the Eisenhower administration. Federal judges ordered these desegregations, and at the time, the Arkansas governor in 1957 and the Mississippi governor in 1962 used state police to frustrate the order, not to enforce it. The enforcement of those orders, it was proper to use the military. The only other time that the military can be used is when there's a rebellion or an insurrection. And the courts have defined rebellion and insurrection to mean a state of affairs, either natural, like Katrina, or man-made, like a riot, where the courts are unable to sit, where people can't be arrested and brought before judges. That is hardly the case here. That wasn't even the case on 9/11.
Of course. Judge, we only got about a minute left to go, but I have to say, when are you going to get your own show on Fox News? And is there any truth to the rumor you'll be placing Judge Janine? I'm sorry, that was a horrible joke.
Oh, God.
Horrible joke.
She's my friend. Ask my bosses that one. I do have a show on Fox Nation, which is Fox's third platform. It's dark until we're all back, but they let me be my freedom-loving self.
Well, Judge, you are one of the smartest guys I know on television, and you do such a wonderful job, and we all have a tremendous amount of respect for you. You make us sound stupid, that's for sure. You are a smart guy.
That. God bless
you do.
Thank you for having me on. All the best.
Thank you, Judge. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Judge.
That is Judge Andrew Napolitano. Wow, is that a smart guy? Wow, did we get a lot in that interview. First of all, he thinks that this officer should be charged with first-degree murder.
Yep.
That's number one. Number two, he also said that, you can't attack somebody or shoot somebody to kill, and you can't shoot somebody, period.
But he said that law should change.
Well, that's a different subject. I'm just going by the law.
Brian, had these business owners been able to protect themselves with deadly force, this looting and rioting would be none of the National Guard would be required. No military units would be required. You would have business owners in their stores with guns, just ready to kill people that try to destroy their property.